people in the South and to people in the North that didn't care about slavery. Okay? These are forcing them to really question their stance on popular sovereignty. Because the issue really with all three of these is what popular sovereignty is supposed to be versus what happens when it's actually carried out. And you have the Northerners, people like Stephen Douglas, who say, wait, the people are supposed to have a say. And when they don't, they want to distance themselves from all of these. The Southerners, though, their main goal was always the spread of slavery. So it doesn't matter if these votes were fraudulent, they still should be accepted. Okay? Yeah?
What's Freeport?
The Freeport Doctrine?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about immigration. Okay? These immigrants that start coming in the 40s and 50s, they are different from immigrants before. Okay? What's so different about them? Yeah?
They were too big, they were less skilled, and they were Catholic.
Okay, good. So before they used to come in and take skilled jobs, which there wasn't enough Americans going to school that they could, take those jobs and it was fine. But now you have the Irish and you have Germans who come here because of the potato famine and problems like that, that are taking farming jobs, that are taking factory jobs, that are taking unskilled labor. Okay? Another issue is language barrier. Okay? People from before were British, they were speaking English and they came here and it was all fine. Third issue is a cultural difference, okay? Especially in terms of what? Yeah.
Like religion.
Okay, religion, good, yes, and drinking, okay? And the last one is because of the Industrial Revolution, there's more crime because people live in cities. It also coincides at the time that all of the Irish are coming over, so who gets blamed for all the crime? Okay, but definitely Roman Catholic is a huge problem for people in the U.S. Just in terms of time, guys, I'm going to skip the economic issues and the moral issues. Yeah, they're pretty straightforward. Right? But I do want to go over the three books, just so that way you can compare them. Okay? So, James D.B. DeVal and Commerce is King. Okay? What was kind of the thesis of his argument? What was he talking about? He's from the South. Yes?
To get them to go back to just focusing on making money because that's the investment.
Okay, it's actually the opposite. Okay? So he was trying to argue for economic diversification. Okay? Commerce is king. Getting them to do more than just sell cotton. Okay? He wants them to industrialize. He wants them to basically better themselves. This is a Southerner who wrote this.
It was because you didn't want people to come in the north as much.
Correct. Right? So what you have to realize also is this whole time the North and the South have developed very differently. The issue now is they're not getting along, so the South feels like it's an issue to still be reliant on the North. Okay? So you have DeVal who's saying we can't be reliant on the North anymore. We have to have factories here. We have to do things on our own. It's actually very similar to Helper's argument, who also says the same thing. We don't have culture down south. People are leaving here. Nobody wants to live here. We're dependent on the North for everything. Val's solution, though, is economic diversification. What was Helper's solution?
Abolition.
Abolition. Okay, and that's why he's run out of the South. But they have very similar arguments. They're both saying we're too dependent on the North. We have this colonial dependence. We have to break free. Okay? The difference is their solution. Right? He says we have to split away from the North. We have to develop our own economy. And he says it's all of the plantation owners' fault, and we have to abolish slavery. That's the only way to fix things. Okay? All three of these people are from the South. Okay? Fitzhughes has the complete opposite of both of them. Okay? What is his argument?
The South is just the best, and we don't need the North, but we can just keep doing what we're doing.
you're better off as a slave than you are as a wage slave like they have up north. Right? That this is a community down south. We treat people well here versus in the north, you die in the street if you can't work.
What was the solution then?
What?
What was the solution?
His solution was that leave everything alone. The south is perfect the way that it is. The other point is, out of these books, which ones are banned in the South? Just Helper, right? It's the only one that's saying really anything that's anti-Southern because they're saying abolition, right? Which one is banned in the North? None, right? They're all allowed in the North, right? But you do have this book along with like Uncle Tom's Cabin and other Northern books that are banned from the South. Okay? So next, we have John Brown. Right? Why do some historians believe that he is completely to blame for the entire Civil War? Zach?
He caused violence and there wasn't any physical violence.
Good. Right? He escalates the conflict. He convinces Southerners that every Northerner wants to do this. Okay? When in reality, it's not like that. Okay? Right? It sets off this reign of terror in the South, where they start to run people out that don't necessarily support slavery. People like Helper, for example, are kicked out of the South. Okay. Lincoln-Douglas debates. Why are they debating? Senate seat. Right? So they first debate 1858, okay, for the Illinois Senate seat. Key ideas. Okay, look over that chart with the major things. He still says popular sovereignty, and Lincoln says we have to make a decision. Okay, we have to stop it from expanding. Okay, Lincoln's end goal is eventually to get rid of slavery, but he doesn't think that's going to happen right away. His first step is to say we can't let it grow. Okay, right? If you're sick, you don't go outside and cough all over everybody. You stay inside and keep it to yourself. Okay, so that's the same thing that he's saying. Is you don't want to expand slavery. Okay? The other major topic that comes up, right, is the Freeport Doctrine. Okay? And this is a question that Lincoln poses to Douglas. Okay? He asks Douglas, how do you support popular sovereignty and the Dred Scott decision? Okay? Remember, Dred Scott said things like the Missouri Compromise, things like the federal government.
Heselton is in the building. Please
Making a
report to the
decision
attendance
is
office.
unconstitutional.
Lauren
Okay.
Heselton. Thank you.
So these two, right, they're conflicting. Okay, this is saying that the people should have a say, the federal government should allow it. And this one is saying that the federal government has to protect slavery out west. So this is yes to slavery expanding. This is saying people have a choice. So Lincoln asks Douglas, how can you support both? And Douglas's response is known as the Freeport Doctrine. Okay. What does Douglas say? What is the Freeport Doctrine? I don't remember. Yeah.
Would be like that if the people out there don't want slavery, then it won't be slavery.
Good. Okay. So he basically says it doesn't matter if the Supreme Court has made this decision. It doesn't matter if Southerners want it out there. It's always going to come down to the people who live there. Okay. Remember the example I used in class was in New Jersey, it's still illegal to slurp soup in a restaurant. Okay. But the only thing that doesn't make that a law that we see or that affects us is people have chosen not to enforce it. So he's saying the same thing. Yes, the federal government might have to allow people to go out west, but it comes down to the people who live there. If they want to allow slavery, slaves will move in. If they don't want to allow it, slavery will be kicked out. Okay? So that answer is unacceptable to Southerners. Okay? This, remember, was their pride and joy. They were so excited. They were finally going to be able to bring their slaves wherever they wanted throughout the country, okay, especially out into Western territories. They start to demand that there is a federal slave code that promises them what Dred Scott said, that they could bring their slaves out west. Okay? This is the Freeport Doctrine, and that split is what makes it so the Southerners will not pick Douglas in the election of 1860. And that's why they wind up splitting. Okay? You have the Northerners who support Douglas, and you have the Southerners that go with Breckinridge instead. Okay? And now we get to our final topic, the election of 1860. Right here we have the Northern Democrats who picked Douglas. You have the Southern Democrats who picked Breckinridge. Right? You have the Republicans who picked Lincoln, and then feeling like they don't have, that is too extreme, okay, and that they might not want to vote with these Southerners, you have the Constitutional Union Party that forms.
Doesn't that essentially take away votes from Breckinridge though?
Yeah.
So it's just,
The goal was to try to split it up enough that eventually, like the House could decide, because Douglas probably would have won if they were allowed to pick that way, because people looked at him as more acceptable than Lincoln. Yeah, the idea was to split it up enough that, you know, Bell wouldn't have gotten enough to have these three go, and it doesn't work out like that. Okay. So Lincoln winds up winning. He doesn't even get 40% of the population of the popular vote, but he does win the Electoral College by a lot. Okay. Well, how is that possible? How can you only get 40% of the popular vote and so much of the electoral? Okay, so not quite in this case. Yes.
Because it's split up so much between like the different people.
Not quite. Yes.
States aren't proportional with their popular vote and their electoral vote.
Yeah. Okay, right. The North is so densely populated that it allows them to have more electoral votes, right, and for him to win the presidency. What happens as soon as he's elected?
The South secede.
Right? So they don't even wait for him to be inaugurated. They just wait for the election to end. And we have our first state that secedes in what month? December of 1860. Okay? So December of 1860, South Carolina secedes. Okay? And from January until, I went backwards in time, February. Okay, you have the rest of the Deep South. For a total of how many?
7.
We have to know like the exact dates.
You don't have to know the exact dates. I mean, you kind of do have to know like at the end of 1860 to 1861, but not for like, I wouldn't ask you like, who seceded on January 9th.
Okay, and then do you know like the order of this like secession besides South Carolina?
You should know like the Deep South, and then you should know like the 4 states that go after Fort Sumter. So like know them in chunks basically. Okay. Okay. So then March 4th, Lincoln is inaugurated. The day after, he gets word that Fort Sumter is running out of supplies, and April, Civil War starts. Okay? Lincoln calls for more troops, and what happens right after that?
South doesn't send